I think the Hidebehind is real. I just don't think it's what we thought. They say the Hidebehind lives in the deep places of the forest, where light hesitates and the trees crowd so close their branches knit the sky shut. No one really knows what it looks like, because anyone who glimpses it never lives to speak. It moves soundlessly, just beyond the edges of vision. It follows from behind, always watching. Old woodsmen whispered that it feasted on fear itself, a creature that didn't merely kill you, but hollowed you out from the inside until your mind was just another branch to be snapped off the tree. I grew up scoffing at those stories, superstitions to scare children around campfires, until 2 weeks ago, when I inherited my grandfather's land in the northern Maine woods and realized that some legends are born from truths too terrible to face. The truck's headlights cut a narrow beam through the pre-dawn fog as I rolled onto the overgrown logging road that led to Grandpa's property. He'd passed last fall, and the land, 400 acres of tangled pines and spruces, had fallen to me by default. I'd always dreaded I'd end up with it, a worthless patch of woods, untouched since Prohibition, where no sane soul ventured after dark. That morning, the air tasted of damp moss and decay. I hopped out, boots sinking into spongy undergrowth. In the weak glow of my headlamp, I surveyed the clearing where Grandpa's old cabin had stood, until a storm 2 years ago snapped its roof off like a matchstick. Now, only weeds and rotting floorboards remained. I hefted my gear, a chainsaw, an axe, marking flags, and a road map scrawled with half-melted notes Grandpa had left in a drawer. He'd written little about this place, just plots, trails, and the warning, stay on the high ground. Never follow the echo. I shrugged it off as Grandpa's eccentricity. After all, echoes don't come in forests. As I stepped into the trees, the world contracted to the circle of my beam. 1,000 pine needles whispered overhead, yet I could feel the silence hugging me, pressing close. An hour in, the work began smoothly. I cleared fallen limbs, stacked logs, planning a rough path through the glade. But every time I turned my back for a moment, something would shift. My orange tape markers vanished. A fallen branch I'd snapped in half, whole again, as if nothing had touched it. I'd stop, listening, and hear nothing but the silence. No birds, no rustle of small creatures. The forest held its breath as I worked. Then came the glimpses. Out of the corner of my eye, something flickering, darker than shadow, darting between trunks. Too tall to be a deer, too slender for a bear, always just out of focus. When I spun around, nothing remained but moss and gloom. By noon, my stomach knotted. I'd dropped my wrench against a stump, and when I turned, it was gone. I hunted within a 3-meter radius. Nothing. No footprints in the damp forest floor. No sign the tool had been anywhere but exactly where I left it. A sudden gust of wind rattled the pines. I gripped my headlamp tighter. The high notes of the branches sounded almost wrong, like a warning cry. I shook my head and pressed on, aware that the forest felt less like home and more like an organism watching my every move. Late afternoon light slanted low when I reached a hollow I'd never noticed. There, half hidden by leaning black pines, sat a shack. Its wood boards were bleached to ash. Windows yawned empty, and the door hung loose on its hinges. No chimney, no sign on any map. Nothing but rot and stillness. I hesitated at the threshold. My tools, my map, all my plans felt trivial next to this thing. A dare welled in my chest. Go on? Step inside. I unsnapped my belt holster, let the radio clatter to the floor. Only the hush answered. Inside, the air was colder than outside. Swirls of dust motes drifted in feeble shafts of dying sunlight. At the center lay a mound of bones, twisted, broken, some human, some animal, fused into a grotesque puzzle under a thin layer of mold. The walls bore carvings, hundreds of gouged symbols, not words, but eye shapes, dull hollows that seemed to follow me, perched above splintered boards, like vultures waiting for carrion. I felt my pulse hammer, checked my phone, no signal. On a rickety table in the corner lay a leather-bound journal, half covered in pine needles. I flipped it open. The entries were Grandpa's handwriting, neat at first, then scrawling madly. June 3rd. Footprints appear at dawn, small, slanted. Behavior is odd. The trees, they lean. June 10th. Voices in the walls. Mother thinks I've lost it. June 12th. I saw it. Tall, jointed limbs. No face. Just skin drawn tight. It breathes the dark. My throat went dry. I stuffed the journal into my pack and backed out of the shack. A low creak made me whirl, but the door had swung closed on its own. The sun was a bleeding orb on the horizon when I sprinted to my truck. Behind me, the forest sighed like a dozen lungs. I dared not look back, but every few steps I felt the air grow colder, as though something exhaled just behind me. I slammed inside, locked the doors. The world beyond the windshield shimmered in the dying light. Trees danced at the corner of vision. I fumbled the keys and peeled out, tires spinning on gravel. That night, in a motel just off Route 1, sleep was a twisted labyrinth. Waking bursts of panic. Imagine footsteps on the vinyl floor, shadow figures pressed against the window. In the mirror across the room, I thought I saw a tall shape leaning in, watching. I blinked. It was gone. At dawn, I thought, it's over. I tell myself those stories were real, but maybe they've stayed behind in the forest. Back in my own house, the Hidebehind did not release me. Doors I'd locked creaked open in the night. Objects moved, 1 minute on the mantel, the next in the hallway. My phone buzzed with static, slicing at my nerves. In the bathroom, I stared into the mirror. My reflection seemed delayed, like a broken video feed. I snapped my fingers and watched the mirror still. A figure crouched behind me, slender limbs splayed, ribs paling under the skin. I whirled, but nothing stood there. Lights flickered. The thermostat climbed past 70. I knew I should leave, drive away. But something in me rooted me like the trees of that forest, immobile. By the third day, I was skittering at shadows. I woke to hear breathing through the vent above my bed. Low, wet rasping, like lungs learning to imitate human sound. I lay frozen, sweating in the dark, until I realized the breathing was echoing my own heartbeat. The journal pages had begun to slip from my mind like soggy paper. In my own handwriting, I found scrawled notes. It's here. It knows I know. But I couldn't remember writing them. My phone filled with photos I didn't take. Each one showed my living room, but with something bent and crouching where light shouldn't reach. I'd swipe the screen to enlarge, only to see empty rooms. I could no longer trust sight, sound, or memory. Clocks ran backward, hallways stretched impossibly long. The floor dipped beneath my feet, as though the house itself were breathing. Neighbors knocked, and I didn't answer. Emails piled up, unanswered. Once a delivery man left a package at my door. I opened it to find a single carved eye, made of bone. I screamed, but the walls drank the sound. The only solution left was destruction. If the hide behind was tied to places, trees, boards, walls, I would burn it out. In the dead of night, I poured gasoline through every crack of my house. My hands shook so violently, I doused the driveway too. I stood at the front, lighter in hand, and the forest beyond the clearing pressed in, shadow shifting like hungry mouths. I clicked the lighter. The flame guttered, then roared. A line of fire bloomed across the floorboards. Flames licked the walls, crackling with fury. The house became a living thing, screaming in heat and smoke. Outside, I barely register the shriek. Many shrieks, like human voices torn through fire. I tripped over my own feet and staggered toward the truck. Through the orange haze, I thought I saw shapes, tall and twisted, crawling within the walls of flame. They writhed against the heat, pressing like insects in a magnifying glass. Their eyeless faces turned toward me in silent accusation. I drove away as the roof collapsed in a thunder of burning timber. The woods behind me glowed red, sparks dancing into the moonlit sky. I parked by the roadside under a flickering street lamp. For a moment, I believed the fire had purged the evil, but the light buzzed sickly, dipping in brightness. The breathing returned, subtler now, but everywhere, beneath the truck seat, in the rustle of plastic bags in the bed, in the engine's idling pulse. I peered out the windshield. Standing at the edge of the tree line, as still as a gravestone, was a tall shape. No face, skin drawn tight over empty sockets. It cocked its head, as though curious. Then it strode forward, limbs bending at impossible angles, into the ring of streetlight. I ducked. My heart thundered. In the rearview mirror, I caught its reflection, and it smiled with teeth too many to be human. Was 3 years ago, right before the pandemic hit, and now, one of my favorite stories to tell. Now that I'm no longer scared, I've moved 1,000 miles away. In a few years' time has passed, so my husband was in the military during this time, and I was a housewife due to work being hard for me to get in my area that I was in, as I can't drive, and lived off base. Well, any military person knows that a military schedule is pretty darn predictable, and much of our lives ran on an easy-to-memorize routine. And to make matters worse, my husband was often gone for long hours for about 2 to 3 months. I had been seeing this guy wandering around my home, peeking in windows. Honestly, I didn't originally think much of it. Beyond being weirded out, we didn't have anything that would interest a robber. No TV, a single 7-year-old computer, a broken couch and table, and a mattress on the floor. Literally nothing expensive in our home, beyond a gun that was locked up in a safe that might have looked like it had valuables, but that's a lot of work for what looked like a home of people living in Pody. So I didn't think anything of it yet. He kept coming back when my husband was gone. I'd seen him every few days, or hear him due to my normally super sweet cat at the time, hating him, hissing and yelling when he saw him, so I'd know that he was there. When I'd hear my cat making an angry fuss. One day I went out with my husband, and I guess I didn't lock the door properly or something, as our lock could be a bit finicky, and I was running late. According to our normal schedule, I would have gone to base with my husband for a family mandatory fun event and came back home alone, and an Uber while my husband stayed at the base to work or hang out with his friends. And what ended up happening was that I fell sick with a migraine. I have hemiplegic migraine, so it can actually be pretty serious, and his sergeant told him to take me home and take care of me when he saw me. Not before I go on, I should probably describe my old home. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment complex in the mountains. It was a massive complex. My home layout was this: my front door led to my kitchen and dining area, and the wall next to my door had another glass door, I think a patio, and across from my kitchen was my room. Then you go down the hall and hit the living room, which had another glass door wall next to the fireplace. And finally, after that, you go across the living room at the end of the hall and reach our guest room, or my plant room, cat's playroom, SLG guest room, which had yet another glass door. I was literally surrounded by giant glass doors. And outside we had a porch, and on the porch was a storage closet where I usually kept my bike since I couldn't drive due to my migraines and seizures now. Back to the story, now that I've set the scene. When my husband brought me home again, not per our normal schedule, we arrived to find our door slightly ajar. We gave each other a look and went inside anyway, with me mumbling that I must not have locked it properly due to being in a rush that morning. We walked into the kitchen, where my husband immediately went to the fridge, looking around for water for himself and me. He then spoke for the first time in the fridge. Honestly, I don't even remember what he said, but a few seconds after he spoke, we heard something our porch glass door at the back of our home moved, and we both knew that sound really well, since I like to sit in the porch, reading for hours, so I was always coming in and out. He grabbed my shoulder and whispered for me to grab his gun from our room. He then grabbed a knife and went toward the living room. I went and grabbed the gun, noticing on my way into our room that our living room glass porch door was wide open, and upon giving my husband the gun and following behind him, I dialed 911 in my panic, saying I had an active break-in while my husband did a sweep of our home. I walked back down the hall toward the kitchen to see if the intruder had gone around the back to the front. The only way out of the area he went. We lived on a literal mountainside, and one side was blocked off out back. I was a freshman in high school. I'm currently a senior. My freshman year, I moved schools and started hanging out with a new friend group. 2 friends from that group already lived in my neighborhood, so we usually all just hang out at my house. Whenever we decided to go to my other friend's house, we'd usually just walk, since it was close. Those friends were just renting their house at the time, so eventually they sold it and bought a house in the same neighborhood. When they moved in, we started hanging out there a lot, since they had a huge garage in their backyard where we could chill without being bothered too much. And we eventually got tired of walking all the way over there, since it was on the complete opposite side of the neighborhood. And since we couldn't drive, we started taking a shortcut. There was a path through someone's lawn on my side of the neighborhood, so we started cutting through their yard. During the day, my friend said that at one point they talked to the owners while they were outside, and they said they didn't mind us walking through their yard as long as we didn't wake them up. They even turned off their motion sensor lights so we could cut through at night without causing commotion, and all was well for a couple of weeks, and until we noticed that the man in the house across the street would always be outside with a cigarette, taking pictures of us when we walked up the road. And this went on for a good year or 2. We told my parents, but just tried to ignore it altogether, since it creeped us out. And the creepiest part was that no matter what time we went through, he was always out there watching and snapping pictures of us. It didn't matter if it was 3 p.m. or 3 a.m. He was always lurking in the shadows of his porch with that cigarette ready to snap a picture. Now fast forward to my junior year. My friend was house sitting for his parents while we were on vacation. We were all staying over there and decided to run over to my house for food. And on the way over, I spotted the cigarette and pointed it out to my friend. Mind you, it was 2:30 a.m., and we could feel this dude staring at us. We started to crap bricks and walked faster and faster until we got off that road. When we got back to my house, we both felt really uneasy, so we grabbed a couple of knives and a can of mace before heading back with snacks. I also decided to grab flashlights since it was especially dark that night. And as soon as we got close to the house again, I got that same eerie feeling. I saw what looked like a person crouch behind a bush in the front yard. I lit the bush up with my flashlight and immediately saw a shadow darting back behind a tree. We started walking fast after and kept looking back every few seconds, and that's when I saw a silhouette of legs standing perfectly still on the other side of the camper in their driveway. I absolutely pooped my pants and sprinted through the shortcut into my friend's back door. I don't know what this guy's intentions are, but they definitely don't seem good. And even now, whenever we walk through there, he's always outside watching. And since then, one very strange thing has happened. I don't know if it was the same guy die, but it very well could have been. One night, we were walking my friend home in my neighborhood and decided to take the long way back to my house. To avoid that creepy guy again, we dropped him off and all was well until we started walking back. It was me and 3 other friends. We were almost at the end of the road near the stop sign when a white truck flew up to us, rolled down the window, and started barking questions at us. I tried to remain calm and ask him if there was some problem. He said that someone in a blue hoodie had walked onto his back porch and was banging on the glass door. One of my friends was wearing a white hoodie, by the way. But still, this guy started accusing him of doing it, even though we hadn't gone on anyone's porch at all. He demanded our names, so I just gave him my first name and nothing else. The entire time he had his hand on his hip, looking like he was about to burst a blood vessel in his head. He was so angry, we told him that we were in the complete opposite side of the neighborhood when it happened. But he didn't buy it, and he got angry and just screamed at us. Don't you boys know it's dangerous to be out here at this time? And I just said, now I do. And he pretended to drive off. But as we started walking back, he began following us in his car. For the entire 20-minute walk back, this creepy weirdo trailed us about 100 feet behind in his truck, matching our pace. And he followed us down 3 turns, all the way to my house. And the moment he saw us go inside, he speeds off. I didn't wake my parents, which was stupid, and in hindsight, I definitely should have. So they could have gone outside and asked this weirdo what in God's name he was doing, harassing us alone at 2 a.m. and stalking us back to my house. I don't know if it was the same guy since he claimed his house was in a different side of the neighborhood, but he could have been lying. Anyone unhinged enough to follow some kids home like that can't be taken seriously. My name is Ellie, and I'm 24 from Topeka, Kansas. I want to tell you about the single worst thing that's ever happened to me. I've been a fan of your channel for a long time, and I'd always hoped that nothing worth writing to you about would ever actually happen to me. But it seems my luck has finally run out. But I don't want to just share my story with you. I actually need your help. And by the end of my story, I think you'll understand why it all started around 18 months ago, which right now feels like a whole entire lifetime ago. I first encountered him, or at least I think I first encountered him, at the diner where I used to work. I was a waitress, the kind who smiles at everyone, even the weirdos. And while he was one of those quiet types, tall, thin, with greasy black hair that hung over his eyes, all mumbles and no eye contact, at least at first anyway, I remember he wore a gray hoodie, most days stained at the sleeves, like he hadn't washed it in quite a while. And then he'd sit in the corner booth for hours on end, just kind of nursing some black coffee. But it was only ever a black coffee, and I didn't think much of him at first. People come and people go, but this particular guy just sort of kept staring at me, not in a flirty sort of notey me way either. His eyes were cold, like he was studying me, or maybe even sizing me up. Then came the night that I caught him watching me through the window as I locked up, and I told myself that it was nothing, just some weirdo lonely guy who thought that I was pretty and hadn't been taught that it was rude to stare. But it wasn't long before things started to get really creepy. About a week later, I found a note slipped under my front door. It was sort of scrawled on a torn piece of notebook paper, and it said, "You look pretty in blue." Today, my work uniform wasn't blue. Not at all, but what had actually been blue were the underwear that I've been wearing that day. And in that moment, my stomach dropped. I lived alone. No one was supposed to know what I was wearing underneath, and my uniform didn't show anything off either. I checked the locks, the windows, and everything seemed fine. I threw the note away and told myself that it was nothing, maybe a prank, possibly by some local kids, I guess. And I tried to reassure myself with stuff like that, but it didn't work. And I started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow, and things got way, way worse over the weeks that followed. I started seeing the guy everywhere. Not up close, just glimpses here and there, at a distance, a shadow. Across the street, when I walked home, a figure standing under the street light outside my house, at night, but I really never knew. I didn't always see his face, but it really felt like it was him. Once, I swore that I saw him in the grocery store, 2 aisles over, peeking through the cereal boxes, and I turned to look, and he was already gone. I knew that I was probably being paranoid, and that I was imagining things overworked, overstressed, no sleep, all that kind of stuff. But the notes kept coming, and it would say stuff like, "I like your hair down. You shouldn't leave your curtains open. And I'm closer than you think." Each note in this childlike handwriting of his, it made my skin crawl a little more. Each time I got one, and on the advice of a friend, I stopped throwing them away and instead kept them in a shoebox as proof that something was very, very wrong. I prayed things would get better, but to get bored of me. But the situation got even worse. As time went by, I'd hear footsteps behind me on my way home from work. But when I turned, no one was there. My trash can started getting knocked over, and once I found a dead bird on my porch. Its little neck had been snapped, and its feathers were all over the steps, where somebody had apparently been ripping them out. And the notes get even creepier too. "I can hear you breathing at night," or "You can't hide from me." And I almost stopped sleeping altogether. I'd sit up with the lights on, just clutching my knife, waiting for something to happen, and I knew that he was out there watching and getting closer, and it was only a matter of time before he made his move on me. But in the end, I couldn't take it anymore, and told my neighbor Tom about it now. He's an older guy, Tom. Pretty sure he's in his 50s, with a very kind face, big belly, and a loud laugh. And he lived across the street from me, and we'd always wave to each other. One afternoon, I knocked on his door, pretty much shaking at that point, and just spilled my guts about everything that had been happening, the notes, the footprints, that sickening feeling of being hunted, and I told him how scared I was, that the whole thing seemed to be getting worse and worse with each passing day, and that I was scared that the guy stalking me was going to actually end up hurting me. I remember him frowning, putting a hand on my shoulder, and told me that I wasn't alone. You see anything weird, you call me, okay? He told me day or night, I'll come running. I nodded, grateful for the offer of help that I don't think I can even put into words. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I actually had someone on my side. But the stalking didn't stop, and the notes slowly turned into what I perceived to be threats. I'll cut your pretty throat. No one can save you. I'm coming for you soon. It would say I stopped going outside unless I had to, and I checked the locks 10 times a night, sometimes. And then one night, he made everything fall apart. I was in my kitchen, making tea to calm my nerves, when I saw him a figure walking up my driveway, tall, thin, moving very slowly, like he didn't care if I actually saw him. And that was like his signature. I guess how I'd always know that it was him. My heart stopped in my chest. This was it. It was actually here to kill me. Obviously, I finally ran to the phone and dialed 911. I told them that someone's trying to break into my house. My voice was shaky, and I tried to whisper, "Please hurry." The operator told me to stay calm and told me that help was on the way. But all the same, I grabbed my cell phone and called Tom, my neighbor. It rang and rang, but he didn't pick up, and I remember thinking, come on. But I still got nothing, no answer, no voicemail, no nothing. I hung up, and there was panic starting to rise up inside my chest because I knew the cops wouldn't get there in time, and I was completely and totally on my own. I had a gun, a little handgun, my dad gave me when I moved out, and I've never used it, but I kept it loaded on my nightstand. I grabbed it, my hands trembling, and crept to the top of the stairs. The house was quiet, but I could feel him out there waiting. I crouched in the dark, gun just pointed at the front door, praying that the cops would show up first. And these minutes dragged by my palms, were sweaty, slipping on the grip of the gun, and then out of nowhere, bam! The door flew open, kicked hard, splintering the frame, before a shadow stepped inside very quickly. And in that moment, I didn't think I just screamed and pulled the trigger. 3 shots loud and sharp, making my ears ring. This person grunted and fell sprawled on the floor. I dropped the gun, and I was shaking, like I'd never before in my entire life. Before I stumbled down the stairs, the lights were off and I could see blood pulling on the hardwood floor. And there was lots of it, too. I flipped the switch, feeling the sick kind of relief, and knowing that my problems were about to be buried, 6 feet deep. But when I flicked that light switch on, my entire world had fell apart. There wasn't the stalker, lying there bleeding out in my hallway. It was my neighbor Tom. His kind face was pale, his chest torn open from the bullets, and he'd been holding a FL flashlight, not even a weapon. And I remember sobbing before falling to my knees. I cried out that I was sorry, that I didn't know, and he was just wheezing, blood bubbling at his lips as he struggled to breathe. And then he just went still. I pressed my hands to his chest, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was too late, and he died right there. And when the police arrived minutes later, I was still screaming, covered in Tom's blood, trying to revive him. Before they pulled me off, paramedics rushed him to the hospital, but I already knew that there was no saving him. After I explained everything that had happened, the cops put me in handcuffs and took me to their station, and I told them everything about that stalker, about the notes, and the threats I showed them, the shoebox full of all of this evidence, and felt totally vindicated in doing so too, because it all made keeping that box of cursed paper finally worth it. I told them that I thought my stalker was at the door, that he'd come to kill me, and that I didn't think Tom had seen my calls, let alone piece together what was happening. They listened and wrote it all down. But then, instead of being sympathetic, their face was very cold, like they didn't believe me. They later told me, at around 3 in the morning, that Tom died on the operating table, and all I could do was sit there in that cold interrogation room, feeling completely numb, and then I cried until I couldn't anymore. The police searched my house, my yard, the whole neighborhood. They looked into the stalker, asked me for his name, description, really anything, and I told them what I knew, that he was tall and thin, with greasy hair and a gray hoodie. And they checked the diner's security footage, asking my coworkers about him, but no one but me could remember seeing this guy, or really have any inclination as to who he was. They went through the notes